room, so that's really nice. The session today will be, well, this session, there will be lots of sessions today, is about the PNP reusable controls and the PNP JavaScript library. And basically a starting point and demonstrate some of the controls you have and how easy it is to use them. And hopefully, has anyone ever seen them before? Everyone did? Oh, that's nice. Okay. I hope you will learn something then. So my name is Joel Rodrigues. I'm from Portugal, currently in the UK. I work as a development consultant for corporate project solutions. We do basically everything on Office 365, Azure development, Project Online, very strong on Project Online, Partner of the Year, announced yesterday or 2 days ago, which was really nice. You have my social media information there if you want. You can follow me on Twitter. Blog posts, I need to work a little bit more on that, but you can start following me. Feel free. It will be like one post every month. And the slide we have seen lots of times today. So all the sponsors, the conference is great, but without these guys, we wouldn't be here. So nice one. And the organizers, of course, who work with them. You probably already have the information for the Wi-Fi. I'll carry on. So the agenda. I will cover the reusable controls, React, the property pane controls, and the PNP.js library, and then I will do a demo. I will show you the information about the demo before I start. So reusability. How many times we end up rewriting the same thing over and over and over, sometimes because we are just too lazy to do something, make it reusable, or make it easy to copy between projects, and then you spend half a day trying to find out what part you missed from the snippet you copied from the project last month, and then you realize that you actually needed 2 or 3 extra files, and that goes really, really quick into a really messy situation. How great it will be if some of the components will be there for you to reuse. And that's how these guys come in. So you all said you kind of know them. So you know they have been developed mainly from the PNP core team with some help from Microsoft as well. Apparently some of the code actually came from the engineering team. So they're using that distribution channel to publish some code. They use themselves as reusable components and expect to see a lot more. And everyone can contribute to these projects. If you go there, you will see things pending and people needed for support and all that, cover bug fixes. Everyone can contribute and extend them. So the main advantages they offer is they often cover common business scenarios. Things like, okay, I have a SharePoint list. I just want to display that information on the page. Things like that. You have things to get you covered, like the piece that goes and grabs information from the list. You get controls to display that information in a really nice way. It uses Office UI Fabric, so looks pretty much the same as the rest of SharePoint. It's not like an alien on the page. You have no flashy green text where everything looks clean. The user experience is rich, mainly because of Office UI Fabric. So these ones, reusable components, are for content in pages. And the other ones are the property pane controls. So the web part properties when you edit a web part. The big feature they offer is they are SharePoint aware, if that term even exists. So they already have built-in logic which interacts with SharePoint and does a lot of things behind the scenes, and you don't even need to care about, or you don't need to know how it works, if that works or not, because that's fairly tested. So you can kind of expect it to work. They are extremely simple to configure. In general, there is a few lines you add to your project and your component is up and running. and looks awesome. And again, they are extensible, either by code. You can, for example, download them, extend them on your own copy. You can contribute back to the community because they are open source, or some of them even have extensibility points, for example, events or functions you can pass to the component, so you can own the behavior on your own code, which is great. So you don't have a super dummy component on the page, which doesn't do exactly what you need, and you can't do anything about that. That's not the case. One of the advantages of the Office UI fabric is we are developers, not designers, or most of us are not designers. And we are really bad on it, as you can see from my slides. So a really nice component we have is the file icon. And you basically pass it a name, and it gives you the icon of a file you have. For example, if you get information from a file, you don't need to check the extension or something like that, which is generally what people does. You will basically resolve it for you. List picker, I love this one. Stick it on your project. It will give you single or multi-select list of all the lists on your site. Super convenient. List view, we all had, probably everyone here had to do, okay, have to the scenario where you have a list and someone asks you, okay, go and display that information on the page. And for some reason there is some complexity and you cannot use views, for example, and then you have to do all the UI. Not anymore. Placeholder, that's very, very handy in multiple situations where you can, for example, use it as a default state when you have your web part on the page and it requires configuration before it actually works. You can use it as the default display when there is no information to display to the user, for example. You can do basically anything with it. All the content is configurable, so anything you want. Breadcrumb, because everyone still likes breadcrumbs. I'm not sure why. Even though Microsoft seems to try to keep taking that away from us. Web titles. I've done a fair amount of web part titles over the last years. Hopefully I don't do them again. And often you end up with copying CSS all over the place. Well, we have SAS now, so it's easier, but often you find projects where there is lots of duplication of code, and that's ugly. The less code you write, the better. Oops. The security trim controls is fairly new. I haven't actually had the chance to play with this. It can cover both multiple scenarios, and you basically wrap your content into control, and then it allows you to specify the permissions you want the user to have in order to display that content. Be careful when you work with it, because you may end up with pages with broken layouts, because some users may not have that many content to see there, and the user experience may be a bit poor unless you work, and be careful on what you do. Amazing component, taxonomy picker. That's just awesome. Manage metadata is still an hidden gem in the engineering team. At least now we can have access to the manage metadata and allow the users to easily select it. Basically looks exactly the same. And here as well, the picker is just really nice. Everything looks super close to the default UIs. The dialogues. I'm a bit curious why we still have these, but it's still a thing. They look exactly pretty much the same as the out-of-the-box dialogues, so ugly. quite classic layout, so try to probably not mix them with the modern sites because they will completely look out of context, in my opinion, but I'm not a designer. And then on top of that, you also have the field renders, and you have loads of them. If you do field customizers, these are very handy to basically render fields on. If I don't need to worry about, oh, I have an attachment, do I need to add a link or add an icon or whatever? Just stick with those guys because they are really good. I'm not showing the pictures or anything like that because there's way too many. And now the property pane controls. Some of them are actually now the same as the controls. I mean, you have both versions for property pane and for content controls. Things like the list picker, but they, in my opinion, they are super powerful in this scenario because you don't need to develop parts, for example, where the user just cannot configure them. The old script editor web parts where nothing was configured or easy to configure, or the user experience was just horrible or non-existent, or, oh, just deploy that thing, and then, by the way, you have to change the script to have a different URL, or things like that. That's gone now. Well, hopefully. Hopefully you guys not doing that again. In terms of the advantages they offer, it's pretty much the same as the content controls. But of course, they are used in the web art property pane. Again, all open source. Go and contribute. I want more features. Even though they are kind of hidden on the web art properties, they still follow the Office UI fabric, so the user experience is still rich. Not a common end user functionality, but still offering a rich experience which everyone will be pleased with. And in controls, you have some really good, some maybe not that common to use, but everyone will at some point use them, I guess. The color pickers, be careful with these guys because it has way too much option for the end user. Depending on what you do, they may struggle to select the exact color they need unless they know what they're exactly doing. Maybe if it's a designer, you can go there and it. If it's a normal user, you will probably just, oh, yeah, that color is close. And then you have a green and a dark green or lime on the page. If that color picker is too much, you have a simplified version. That one, it's more easy to control the choices for the users. So it's probably a safer option depending on what you're doing with it. If, of course, for example, you're building a web part where they can fully customize the colors and all that, maybe you want the other one. You want teams to follow. For example, maybe you want this one and give them a pre-selected list. Probably most of us developed a fair amount over the last years. jQuery widgets, full JavaScript implementations. You were moving between your projects. That's gone. You import this thing, you stick it on the project, it will just work. The list picker, as I mentioned before, single or multiple list. By the way, I forgot to mention, all this content on my slides are basically the content which are on the websites where you can get all the information about these guys. I will show you in a moment. That's the same content. So if you want to go and have a play with it and play around, well, even though most of you already said you have worked with them. So the list picker for me is probably the one I use the most. It's just such a common requirement to have a list and have to go and get that list data from some reason, or sometimes from multiple locations. And at least that way you can reuse the web part in different scenarios. One limitation, in my opinion, in this control is that by default, well, you don't have an option at the moment. It will show you the list of the current site where the web part is being added. You cannot configure a different site because sometimes you may want to bring in options from other sites, but at the moment that's not possible. It should be available in the future, I believe. Multi-select, nothing special, although you don't have to implement it. It's there. And the field number, no more number validation, or just letting a text box and then the user go there, oh, add a number here, and they go there and type test, and everything breaks. Not anymore. So your testers will also be happy with that. You'll probably end up with less testing time. Not your. And it's a benefit for the company. If things are more reliable, they will just work better. They will take less time to develop. They won't break as easy. So it's a win-win. Property field order. I think that's really handy, that one. You basically can see the animation, so no point in me explaining it. That side is just trying to show the output of the ordering on the right. People picker. That's a really, really nice one as well. Especially because the experience is great and it works with users, with groups. And for the normal user, it's just as if they were using a out-of-the-box feature because the whole experience is just not natural. Spin buttons, again, in my opinion, that's more about the validation side of things. So you can limit what the user inputs and not give them a full text box. Again, testing time may be a bonus here. Again, another one that's extremely powerful. My demo will cover that one. You can see selected, option to select. You can do single or multi. It's just awesome. If we didn't have this, personally, I would even consider using manage metadata because it generally adds an extra amount of time to develop because of all the complexity compared with the other approaches. So unless it has to be managed metadata, I would, in the past, consider using it or not. While with these controls, everything, it's a lot easier now. And we have REST API now. Collection data. That's basically a dynamic dynamic collection of data you can add. You can have multiple types like text or numbers or drop-downs. I think actually that's limited to 4 at the moment in the yes/no field. So you can basically create a dynamic collection, but on the property side, which is nice because how would you do? You will have to do a UI for this yourself on the property pane, which will be a pain in where you know. And that will just give you an object with all your data. It's extremely easy to consume. And the callouts. So when Microsoft shipped SPFx, everything was nice. Everyone was super excited until you go to the property pane. You have a text box. Nice. You can have a description, and that's it. You can, if you need like an information for your user, like more detailed information like name, and then a button for the, or additional information to just say, for example, add only your first name, not your middle names or things like that. There wasn't an option unless you put all that on the description, and it will look very bad. So these are pretty much copies of the out-of-the-box ones. The difference is they give you an eye icon where you can click, and it shows the message you specify. And it creates a way more better user experience if you need to pass any information, if you need to provide additional information for whoever is using the web part. So moving to the REST side, I hope no one still builds REST calls as a massive long string with selects and expands and tops and filters and all that, because that's painful. And we have this now. So who has not played with PNP.js or the previous version? Everyone done? Any work with it? Right. Probably you guys won't learn anything here. So, as you know, it's a Fluent API. It covers SharePoint and Office 365, the graph. And new feature released about 2 weeks ago, manage metadata. So with the other guys from the property panes and with coverage from this framework, we are pretty much covered on the manage metadata store. We have tools we never had before. The problem is Microsoft doesn't rebuild that thing. I don't know why. It just doesn't work very well. Because it's TypeScript, it's type safe, so you don't have the risk of typing something and you misspelled one of the endpoints or something like that, one of the properties. You basically go, well, I'll show you in a second. You basically go start from your node and then just a dot. You get the full list of options available. It's just great. Configuration is very easy. You can do SPFx, you can do node, apps, whatever you want. Remove complexity, you guys know that. Batch requests. Anyone not done batch requests before? You all done? Right. So batch requests are generally a bit more complicated to deal with. Sometimes they can get painful depending on what you're doing. Their implementation makes it a lot easier. I have a slide with a snippet just to show how easy that is. You should fairly consider using batch requests when you get a chance, because if you had throttling issues in the past, it can be a really complicated scenario to get rid of, especially if you have a product in production and you start getting the issues at that point. That can be a really big problem, and patching may help you on that, because Microsoft won't help you on that. So one nice thing they did on the new version is they broke the framework that it was before into lots of different packages. So when you import the packages to your project, sorry, someone distracted me with almost hitting someone else on the side, falling asleep. So try to shake your head to the front so you don't hit the guy next to you. So by importing only the packages you need, it doesn't have a lot of things you don't need to your project. It's a lot better in terms of maintaining as well, so they can publish separate packages. Don't need to publish the whole thing. I mentioned before he works in different scenarios, and again, he's open source. Feel free to contribute. Everyone will be very happy. At the moment, these are the packages available. You have things like SharePoint there. So if you import SP, you can start from there your requests. Some are like common, have the core things, logging. If you just want to even add logging to a different solution, it doesn't need to be a web part. The two new ones that support taxonomy, this is the base one, and that's the taxonomy implementation. Who knows where this will stop? Probably take over on graph at some point. It's already supporting graph, so I assume at some point it will be extremely powerful and cover most of the endpoints. Some samples of GET requests. Yeah, these ones are just the bit of the request. I took out all the promises things around it, so it could fit on the screen, basically. Simple as that. You go from the SP node, which is the SharePoint package, and then you just navigate as you will do on the REST API. If you were building the string itself, you basically go dot. Instead of typing it, it will just there for you. That's a GET request for a list, the items on a list. This one, that's an example, exactly the same as before, but then on the items, we just specify we want the item with ID 1. And the OData operations, which is basically extending the request with additional properties and selecting the columns we want to retrieve and things like how many max items and other. To add items is, for me, a time saver because it's simple as specifying the items endpoint on a list and pass it to our object, and that's it. Simple as that. You have an object, as soon as it matches the keys match the fields on your list, it will just go in. And the batch request is simple as that. Of course, I took out a little bit of things around, like entity type full name from the list, which is another request you have to do first to get that information, and you need to pass it, which was happening before that. So, but basically, you declare the batch, and then you include the batch on your request, and that's it. In the end, you just execute it, and then you can even have something you can run at the end. Both calls will be executed at the same time. And for each one of them, you can run code, which happens when the call terminates that specific one. So it gives you full flexibility as if you were doing one at a time. Okay, that's enough for slides for now. The demo, it's a very basic demo. I have a site where there is a document library. I will change a web part I already have here with the imports and all that, so you don't see me typing all the code. The web part will just go and allow the user to select a list where he wants to retrieve the documents, filter by term set, and basically display information on a list view. I can show you the site in a bit. As I mentioned before, so if you know, you're probably familiar with these websites. All this content on the slides is basically from this. The sites are extremely rich in terms of information. I doubt you will come here and not be able to use them. You have examples. You have all the information how to import them, how to configure, how to use. Everything you need will be here. You just pick the control you're looking for, and that's it. The same for the other controls. And PNP.js, you will find sometimes that the information may not have the exact scenario you need, but with the existing samples, you are probably able to find that yourself. And in that case, maybe try to contribute back with documentation. So next guy with the same problem won't be struggling. So the site I have here is simple as a document library, 3 documents, different departments, which is manage metadata. And I have a web part already running here. If I jump to the workbench. At the moment, that's nothing there, just normal web part, as it, well, not exactly as it is. So let me show you what I've done to save some time. I basically imported the reusable controls and PNP.js. It's on the site, you can go there and see. But when you import PNP.js, you then have to configure the context. So it's basically copying and pasting the snippet that's on the documentation. I just added some logging so we can see some results as I add the other elements. And I also set some properties for the web part which are not displaying at the moment. So we need to configure the title. Well, we need to configure the title, the list selected by the user, and the term selected by the user. To keep it simple, I'm just doing a single value on both of them. And even the code you will see here is clearly not production ready. It's very simple, just to keep it small. These properties are also passed to the React component that is created when we create a project. As you can see here, there's nothing else. If we go to our component properties, I'm just passing the context and display mode, so I can play a little bit with the interface. And again, title, list, and term. And this update title, you will see in the documentation that's just required by the web part title. So when the web part title control allows you to edit the title when you edit the page. You don't need to go to the properties. And this is just so you can pass the value back to the web part and store it as a property from the component back to the web part. And again, nothing fancy here, just the state to sort the items. On the component itself, I just imported the suspects we need. Constructor just to set default state. You're probably all aware of all of these. Additional logging, and that's the default. So with the reusable controls imported, all we need is to change this interface here. And for that, if you go, for example, to the list picker, it basically gives you a sample. You can just work from here. Or you can just play with TypeScript and IntelliSense. So if we get rid of this, and I just added a snippet here with both list picker and term picker. So you can see here, nothing fancy. You get all the options as you go. Multi-select, simple select, whatever you want. It's very easy to find out all the amount of properties you need for your scenario. With this in place, let's check if it's rebuilt. If we now just refresh that, boom. It's not two text fields, as it will probably be with SPFx out-of-the-box fields, property fields, which you don't have that many choice. And that's way better experience for the user. And if I open the console, we can see that we get the list ID back and the full information about the term. So our web part is ready. I passed the properties to the component, so the component is already aware of all the information. I can get rid of this. And on the render method of the component, we're just going to add the placeholder, which was imported here. So basically, we're just going to show something when there is no items to display to the user. When the web part is not configured. This method is missing here. So if we just had something that just calls the property pineopen method, if we now go back to the page, so what I've done here is I'm just showing the placeholder if there is no list configured, because the user can select, basically the term set is optional. So if I unselect the list, we get that by default, because the user needs to configure a list. So if I put back to documents and get rid of this, we now have the second part of the UI, which is rendering there. If we now had, so I just added a method using the PNP.js library to get the items from the list. And this is as simple as I'm just selecting everything from the list and expanding the file properties. And if the user selects a term, then I'm just basically getting the term information there and passing this these properties to the correct select, expand, and filter options, basically because of the term. So this part is dynamic. And the only thing we need to do here is basically start from SP, and then, as I said, you get full IntelliSense here, where lists, not this list, which you all know because you are all played with this. After that, I'm simply adding the items to the state. I'm not doing anything fancy with it. You will probably see the UI flicking a bit. That's just for them, so that's fine enough. And I'm just logging them on the console, so we can see now that, no, not now, because this method is not being called anywhere else. So this snippet is just to call it if the list is configured on the component mount or update of the properties. If I save this, this function should now execute. Come on. And we should now see 3 items from the list because I'm not selecting anything here. So if I go people, department, IT. Just a second. Yeah, I have an error on my query. You can still make errors, even though it's very simple. because I was playing with the snippets, maybe I put something wrong there. Where? Okay, that's why then. Ooh. How much time do we still have? $14. Almost 10. So there you go. Now it's filtering. So we have all the information we need on the web part. Let's build the UI. If I go here, let's start by adding title, because at the moment we just have the default container that comes from the scaffolding. And let's just add this. Basically, the web part title, you only have to play with the display mode. You pass the title and the function to write back. If I now wait for this. And we have the web part title on the page. So preview, there's nothing there at the moment. If I edit, we can edit straight here. There's nothing there. And if we preview, if you put it on the page, it will just look exactly the same as the out-of-the-box web part titles, which is a bonus. You can, of course, change that if you want. And next, we're gonna have 7. The list view. But for the list view, we need the view field information, which is basically the properties and the configuration of the properties that you are going to display. One thing really, really good that this also allows you to override the render as a function, and you have full control of what goes in there. You can do things like time formatting, because REST will return some fancy daytime. You can use things like moment or whatever you want and format that so you can display in the same format as SharePoint, or things like coloring. Sometimes you have to do calculations. I don't know, like RAG status, for example. You can do it here very easily. Now with that, we have this configuration here. I'm just going to get rid of all of this. Update the render method so that this is the same we had before. If there is no configuration, we just display the placeholder with the option for the user to click and configure. If the configuration is valid, we display the placeholder if there is no items, of course with different information and no configuration button. Otherwise, we just display the web part title and the list view. I added a selection method here, just so when we select items on the list view, because that's not just a very static component, you can do something with it like this. You can click on an item, and that can send you back the item, and you can do whatever you want with it. And I'm just logging it to the console so I can show you. And now if I reload the page, you can see if I refresh again that flicking, that's just because I didn't bother polishing the UI for the demo, but you can see a list that looks similar to out of the box, and you can apply filters, no items for finance, or I can just leave it like that. Of course, that's not even close for production code, as you probably know, I hope. There is no testing, there is no services, there is nothing. All is built into components, and that's probably not what you want to do. I will not recommend to ship something like that, unless it's extremely simple and it's not worth the complexity. And that's pretty much it. So you have all the links on the slides as well. I just put additionally the samples web part from PNP and the extensions. Those two repositories are extremely rich in reusable components, pre-built web parts. Some of them are ready for production, and some of the code there is extremely good, just so you can compare how you code against how other guys code and maybe try to get some insights for that. And that's all from me. Any questions? Yeah?
Can we do a filter in the results of the query to a list, for example, into a page of the number of records we are going to take out of the list, for example?
Sorry, say again. Can you repeat?
Yes. If I have a query to a list, can I filter the number of elements in the list?
Yeah, so let me show you. So if I go back to my code here, where I do the request, if I just do dot top one, and that is limiting the results to one. If I refresh.
Can we select more than 5,000 elements in this?
There is a method to do that. It kind of does, but do requests and then keep incrementing the requests. So you define what's the batch size you want for items. But then you basically specify, I want all the items, but I want in batches of whatever. So it can deal with the complexity behind the scenes for you. If you look on the documentation, look for the get all instead of, so basically this get here is get all. You even have things like caching pre-built there. If you just go here and say dot, using caching, and you have caching enabled. You don't need to worry about adding to local storage or whatever. And that's configurable on the library as well. So when you can configure the time and things like that.
In the library, can I query not only to the list or the document library, even the search?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. You have full IntelliSense for the search endpoint as well, which sometimes can be confusing. So you basically pass an object, and on that object, you get all the properties, and you specify the ones you need. Any other questions? Okay, I'll let you go. Thank you very much.
Awesome, mate.
Everyone knew about that, so I was a bit